Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
America's export of soybeans helps the U.S. maintain a positive agricultural trade balance. Nebraska contributes half of its soybeans for export. The protein and oil content in soybeans enhance the growing demand for higher protein diets. The Nebraska Soybean Board promotes research to develop new soybean varieties with higher protein and oil content for major agricultural markets. The Nebraska Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Market Journal, television for making agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. On this episode, Frayne Olson analyzes wheat markets and prevented planting acre numbers. Shane Ellis looks at profitability in cattle and hog markets. Brad Lubben discusses different aspects of the Farm Bill. And Bruce Anderson talks about nitrate dangers in certain forages. For the first time since July 17, 2012, no portion of Nebraska is in D4 drought classification. The D4 label is for exceptional drought areas and is the worst rating in the U.S. Drought Monitor released from UNL. The overall improvement in the state has also moved more than 1% of land into no drought. Those areas are in the southwestern panhandle and southeastern corners of Nebraska. Later in the show, Al Dutcher will give his weekly weather forecast, which will also include an outlook of potential flooding in Nebraska resulting from heavy rains in Colorado. North Dakota State Extension economist Frayne Olson is our marketing analyst this week. On Tuesday, the USDA's Farm Service Agency released its prevented planting acres for the country's crops. That includes more than 3.5 million acres in corn and 1.6 million acres of soybeans. Nebraska's share is comparatively small, about 11,400 acres for corn and just more than 2,600 soybean acres. We talked with Frayne Thursday morning about these updates, as well as this week's new stock market record and the current condition of crops in North Dakota.
Well, the wheat harvest is almost completed now. We're about 90% complete, but those last few acres are going to take a while because we had a very extended planting season. And of course, for spring wheat, the later you plant it, the later you harvest it, unlike winter wheat, which kind of breaks dormancy all at the same time. So we're kind of wrapping up the wheat harvest. Corn and soybean condition, we're obviously maturing very quickly. We have been catching some rain showers recently, which I think will help a little bit with the later corn and soybeans. On the corn side, primarily putting on some additional test weight. On the later soybeans, we might be able to fill out some of those pods. You know, the crop looks okay. It did take some hits. It was under some stress during that hot spell that we had. But essentially, we needed that up here because we've had a very cool summer, which was very good for wheat yields, but it slowed up the maturity on both corn and beans. So we, in many ways, really needed those heat units to be able to make a crop.
Yeah, I think you're in the popular boat there. I'll ask you a two-part question here. What are you seeing or what are you reading about spring wheat condition across the country? And then for wheat harvest in Canada, what do those numbers look like?
Yeah, the reports coming out of the northern plains, out of Minnesota, North Dakota, Montana on the spring wheat is very good. Most farmers that I've talked to have been very pleased, actually surprised at their wheat yields. Again, the cool summer has helped us with that. Quality is very good. The test weights, the falling numbers are very good. Protein tends to be a little bit lower, and of course for spring wheat, our protein content is one of the things that we differentiate ourselves in the marketplace with. So we may have some challenges on the protein premiums and discounts, but in general, the wheat harvest here is and the quality is very good. Very similar story in Canada. I know I reported earlier that we were concerned about, again, the cool summer and the maturity rate of the Canadian crop. There might be some concerns about frost damage. Again, obviously with the hot couple weeks that we had, that pushed the Canadian crop along as well. They're approximately 35 to 40% completed on their spring wheat harvest right now, which is pretty good progress for them. Again, very similar reports. Yields are good. Base quality is good. Proteins are a little bit low. Stats Canada, or Statistics Canada, which is comparable to our USDA, came out with a report yesterday, and they are looking at very, very good yields and a very good crop. So we're looking at a big production out of that region, basically confirmed in the USDA WASDE report.
And the following question would be, is there enough consumption, is there enough demand to satisfy that wheat that's going to hit the market?
Well, again, earlier we had talked about some of the potential problem spots in the world with production, whether it be the Black Sea or potential problems in Europe and even here in the Northern Plains. But since the last time we talked about that, the weather has really changed, has been very conducive and good for the wheat development and wheat harvest. And so a lot of the concerns we had on the production side have been reduced. It looks like we're going to have plenty of wheat around. Now, the interesting thing is if you look at the world supply-demand condition, the consumption or use is also increasing. And so when you run that all through and look at bottom line, what happens to our ending stocks? Well, world ending stocks are actually going to be down a bit from last year. So there is still interest in world consumption, world use of wheat. We just got to figure out who has it and who needs it.
Earlier this week, the FSA came out with their numbers for prevented planting acres. This might not be as applicable to wheat, but for corn and soybeans, just your overall feeling of what those numbers look like.
Yeah, there was a few of the market analysts and some of the market chatter was a bit surprised at the actual planting certification numbers that came in from FSA for both corn and soybeans. Recognize that information from FSA is used by the World Board, which is the division of USDA that puts the WASDE reports together, supply-demand reports together. And they're going to use that then to update some of the information in the October report. Most analysts expect the planted and harvested acreage for both corn and soybeans to drop a bit in the October report. My view is that that'll have a bigger impact on the soybean or the oilseed complex than it will on corn, just because the oilseed complex is much tighter supply-demand conditions. Corn, we have a little bit of room for adjustment.
Earlier this week, the Fed Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke kind of gave fuel to the stock market when he announced that there wouldn't be a change to his monetary policy, and that's not what people were guessing for. As it relates to ag, how is that important?
Well, it's important because it had a fairly significant influence on the value of the U.S. dollar. And when we look at that as it impacts trade and in particular exports of agricultural commodities, obviously the lower the dollar, the more conducive. So his announcement and then a subsequent drop in the value of the dollar has hopefully short-term will help U.S. exports.
What about if they would decide to change it, Frayne?
Well, moving forward, that's one of the things people have to be very concerned about, because at some point the Federal Reserve is going to change their stance. They're going to start increasing interest rates. That will more than likely increase the value of the U.S. dollar and again make things a bit tougher to sell, U.S. products tougher to sell in the world market. So and that response can come fairly quickly. So farmers need to be concerned, watching that anyway, and we'll have to see what happens.
Next week, Roy Smith will join us to look at corn and soybean markets. Several Chinese companies this week signed an agreement in Davenport, Iowa to buy more than 177 million bushels of U.S. soybeans at an estimated value of $2.8 billion. The arrangement took place during the U.S. Soybean Export Council's Global Trade Exchange. China imports far more soybeans than any other country. It brought in more than 2.1 billion bushels during the last marketing year and is expected to increase that to more than 2.5 billion bushels from all destinations for this marketing period. The separation between earnings and losses in hog and cattle markets is noticeable again in the latest Sterling Profit Tracker. For the week ending September 14th, the average feedlot was shown losing $29 a head, while the farrow to finish margin in pigs was a profit of more than $12 per animal. But barring widespread disaster, this corn crop, even with growing condition hiccups in certain areas, will be a new record for U.S. production. As Iowa State Extension livestock economist Shane Ellis said when we talked Thursday morning, that could finally turn things around for those in the cattle industry.
Well, looking at where we expect things to go, looking at the current market expectations, particularly from the futures market, I think that we'll be seeing a return to profitability in the beef finishing side of things. The pork guys have been making money for the last several months. That's going to kind of taper off at the end of this year. I think for the beef folks, we're going to see a return to profitability as soon as we can get additional amounts of this new crop corn into the rations and work that into the system. I think that we'll have a return to profitability by the end of this year. And then it's probably going to continue on through the coming year, as long as we're feeding that 2013 corn on through until fall of 2014. Right now, just looking at what can be locked in as far as margins, it's a pretty good opportunity, and I'm sure that there's many cattle finishers that are out there that are cashing in on this opportunity or hopefully locking in some profitable margins. These are better margins that we've seen in quite some time, and hopefully it'll breathe a little bit more excitement and interest back into finishing cattle.
Slaughter numbers were way down for cattle, that is, a sharp decline in August. What do you expect as we go through fall?
It's still going to be difficult to find those finished animals just because we just are dealing with a shortage of animals in general all the way through the system. There in August, we saw a sharp decline in the number of beef cows that were going to slaughter. Essentially, for that month, our weekly slaughter of beef cows was down 10,000 head for each of the weeks during August. And you have that kind of a drop-off, it's definitely going to have its impact. But I think that going out into the future, once we get into an opportunity where we can start expanding the herd, I think we'll do a little bit better, but that takes a while. So we are going to continue to see tight feeder cattle and fed cattle supplies for the next several years. It's probably going to be at least 2015, I believe, before we start seeing an increased calf crop coming to market or available in the feeder cattle market.
More immediately, what is your opinion on what might happen here in both the live and the feeder cattle market?
I think that right now the live cattle market is going to be impacted by what happens with the economy. And right now, if you're looking at consumer sentiment and how consumers are feeling, most retailers, both in the food market and outside, are well aware that consumers are feeling the pinch and are not going to be rushing out and spending excessive amounts of money, whether that be eating out or buying those extravagant gifts for Christmas. I think that we're looking at a fourth quarter of this year where consumer spending is going to be kind of stagnant from what it was last year, perhaps a little bit lower. It just depends on whether or not we can help the consumer feel a little bit better about their economic situation right now. And there's so much uncertainty in the economy, both on Wall Street and within the political realms, that I think a lot of folks are just kind of holding their breath. They're not sure where they want to take things. I think that that's going to hold our live cattle prices steady, and maybe we might even lose a little bit of ground there also. As far as the feeder cattle side, I think that we're going to definitely see an impact on feeder cattle prices due to the decreased cost of feed. The cost of gain is going to be dramatically lower, and when you can have an improvement in your margins of over $100 and you're looking at a short supplies of feeder cattle anyway, we're definitely going to be seeing higher feeder cattle prices once we get deeper into harvest time and on into the coming year.
And in pork, those producers have had an opportunity here to carve out at least a little bit of a profit. Do you think they use that at all to try and expand?
I think that they've already been planning on expanding for some time. They were just waiting for the opportunity to cash in on some cheaper feed, and that opportunity is coming. Now, the most recent increase in returns has been due to the higher cost of or the higher value of hogs in the actual market. It wasn't because the feed was any cheaper. Now, if we can get a combination of the higher hog prices and cheaper feed, I think that it will be a pretty good mix for profitability for our swine producers. Now, we're going to have the seasonal decline in November, December for our hog prices. We always have our largest supply of hogs coming to market at that time, and it's going to depress that market. I don't see profitability being there in those months, but during September, October, I think that those will be profitable months for most of our producers. And if we go on out into the coming year, I see sustained profitability from the beginning part of 2014 on through until about the first part of the fall, when the next crop of corn will be coming on. Everything right now as far as profitability is being driven by what the expected feed costs will be.
Our full interview with Shane is available online and through our app. We should note our interview took place before Friday's Cattle on Feed report. With only a little more than a week remaining before the expiration of the current farm bill, the U.S. House of Representatives is trying to move on a nutrition bill. You'll recall the legislation it moved earlier this summer was farm only, but the House wants to have nutrition on the table when or if they make it to conference with the Senate. However, the cuts currently being proposed are double what was being tried in June. UNL Extension Public Policy Specialist Brad Lubben talked with us this week about what that might mean for an overall outcome and also how some lesser-known titles of the Farm Bill could be affected when a conclusion is finally reached.
You know, of course, Congress is back in session here after Labor Day. This week, in fact, they have moved the nutrition bill. The House Republicans have moved a nutrition bill forward, and we expect consideration of that. It's a much more aggressive proposal than what even failed in the Farm Bill vote back in June. It's not $20 billion in proposed cuts, it's $40 billion. So whether the House does or doesn't get that bill forward, whether they get a vote or not on it, it's a big push that's substantially away from the Senate's $4 billion cuts to nutrition. It sets up the stage for the negotiations to come on a conference committee vote, but it probably also makes those negotiations harder.
Yeah, this part is very fluid. There are deadlines right now, but if it goes to conference, does that mean automatically, hey, got a Farm Bill?
Well, if it does go to conference, we presume we can go to conference with or without this nutrition bill this week, and that we can proceed, but there's still a lot of complicated issues to address, including the nutrition funding in general, commodity programs, crop insurance title, a lot of language there yet to sort out. No, it doesn't get resolved very quickly. We have some framework to expect what it would look like, but we still have some real difficult timing questions.
Smart money's still on the no.
No bill in September before the current program expires. Likely no immediate extension of current policy while we sort of wait out the next 3 months. The real push, the real cliff becomes again in December when we have to do something relative to 2014. So a little bit of time to get it done if in fact they're ready to proceed. But still delayed.
The components of the Farm Bill, we know nutrition, the nutrition title plays a huge role, and crop insurance does as well. Tell me about some of the lesser ones and how they're being impacted here.
Well, as you described, the headline issues and maybe the biggest stumbling blocks have been the nutrition title, the commodity and crop insurance titles as part of the safety net. But don't forget a substantial part of the language in the bill, at least, is all these other programs that are relevant to consumers, relevant to rural America. Think of the conservation title, $6 billion a year projected over the next 10 years. Actually bigger than the commodity title because it's growing at the same time the commodity title has been shrinking. Why the investment, why the public investment in conservation? Well, people want to see good stewardship of the nation's resources. Agriculture is the nation's biggest steward of those land resources, and the Farm Bill is the place to take care of that.
And the energy title as well?
Energy title has been quite a bit of focus in the last couple Farm Bills about expanding opportunities, getting that new technology in place, getting it commercialized, encouraging the development of the new bioenergy sector. Big energy policy like the renewable fuel standard is really outside of the Farm Bill, but some of the research and development that might give us that next generation cellulosic finally at a commercial stage, that's happened within the Farm Bill title.
While there was talk of the bill moving to the floor, at the time of this taping, no vote had taken place. The latest state report from the USDA shows Nebraska grasses are in tough shape. 38% of the state's pasture and range is rated as poor or very poor. Open cornfields could provide another feed source for animals as combines begin to move. So far, 2% of corn had been harvested either for silage or as high moisture corn. 2012 brought serious nitrate concerns for farmers and ranchers. While drought conditions in 2013 haven't been as severe across the entire state, UNL Extension forage specialist Bruce Anderson says you should still keep an eye on nitrates before feeding forages.
Well, I think we got to keep in mind that we have gone through another year where, at least in dryland areas, we've gone through some real drought situations in many areas. And when we see that kind of situation, the risk of nitrates building up into some of our crops is very real. We've got pastures that are drying up pretty quickly in a lot of areas. Even with some recent rain, they're going to run out, and as a result, we're trying to get onto corn stalks quickly. Particularly some of the dryland stalks are going to have some risk associated with nitrates, and if we're going to feed some various harvested feedstuffs that could be high nitrates also, we've got to be alert to those risks and take the kind of steps that we need to make sure we don't do any injury to our herd.
Set aside corn stalks for a minute. How real is the threat on other grasses or forages?
Well, I think when we take a look at, especially at a lot of our annual grasses, things, folks that may have had some oat hay or maybe cut some wheat or cereal rye for hay last spring, or planted Sudan grass, sorghum Sudan, some of the millets, some of those annual grasses. They all have a significant risk of having high nitrates, especially if they were growing under some stressful conditions, hail damage, as well as things like the drought. And so if they're going to be fed to the livestock, we're going to be best off making sure that we test them for nitrates so we can be sure that as we allocate them to them, it can be done in a safe manner.
And what about corn stalks? What are the tips that people can use there?
Well, corn stalks may be a little bit different than some of the others because they're mostly used in a grazed situation. And if that's the way that we're using those corn stalks, one of the nice things is that the nitrates are typically most highly concentrated in the lower stem base. And that's the part of the corn that the animals are least likely to graze. So just by their selective grazing when we're on corn stalks, we have some safety built into the whole system. And as long as we don't graze those stalks real hard and start forcing the animals to consume those high nitrate parts, we should be pretty safe.
Don't let them on there too long, I mean.
Don't let them be on there too long, that's right.
You're in your hay and forage minute, you mentioned something about make sure that they have plenty of water around and make sure it's low nitrate water. Why is that important?
Well, the whole issue with the nitrates is the total nitrate concentration and amount that's in the diet for the animals. And water is a part of that diet. We do have places in the state that do have high nitrate levels in their water. And if we start combining high nitrates in the water with marginally high nitrate feeds, the total that the animals are consuming can reach levels that may prove to be toxic to them or cause abortions for the pregnant cows.
Alfalfa in the state probably approaching that final cut. What do you want producers to keep in mind as they approach that last cutting of the season?
Well, I think we always need to recognize at the end of the year here that the alfalfa has to go through a winterizing period. Typically, I say it's from about mid-September to mid-October, and that if we can avoid harvest during that time period, that's going to be best for the alfalfa. It'll be more vigorous and grow more effectively here in the springtime. If we do harvest it during that time, we may see a little slower green up the following spring.
We have more information on nitrates available on the Market Journal website if you're interested. Our shows from September 14th and 21st of last year cover cows grazing stalks and how nitrates affect cattle. 30 Nebraska producers planted Enogen corn this year and will receive premiums for doing so. In the September Nebraska Farmer, you can read about the Syngenta corn trait that's expected to increase the efficiency of the ethanol production process. Syngenta scientists say the corn contains the alpha amylase enzyme, which eliminates the need for the processing plant to use the liquid form of the enzyme. Evan Utoff and Les Albrecht of LE Farms in Dakota County grew the corn in 2013 and are featured in the September Nebraska Farmer. The farmers will receive, on average, a 30-cent per bushel premium when the corn is sold to a participating ethanol plant. Now, with his weekly weather forecast, here's UNL Extension State climatologist Al Dutcher.
Well, folks, here we are again for the weekly forecast. Before we get to the main forecast, kind of give you an update of what we anticipate in regards to the flood situation on the Platte River as the water from the big rain event on the Front Range of the Rocky Mountains has slowly made its way toward Nebraska, and as we go through this next 10-day period, we'll pass through the state. We do expect that the floodwaters will reach central Nebraska as we get into late this week and early part of next week. We're probably looking at that surge of water making it up to Columbus by mid-week to late next week, and then we will see it finally make its way to the Missouri River sometime toward the end of the month. We don't expect the degree of flooding as this floodwater pushes eastward as we've seen in western Nebraska. Of course, the river channel itself widens out secondarily with this couple years of drought that we've been seeing within the basin. There's a lot of room to store some of this water through infiltration, so we should see a lesser impact as we move downstream, but certainly lowland flooding is a distinct possibility, particularly as we get into central Nebraska, and then it'll lessen as it moves up toward the Columbus area. Over this last week, of course, we did see that warm up during the middle part of the week before we seen a cold front come through, and we did see some decent precipitation totals isolated from portions of southeast Nebraska into southwestern Nebraska, much lesser totals as you moved up toward the South Dakota border. And actually, as those thunderstorms passed through southeast Nebraska, we did see some localized heavy rainfall and high winds that did bring some corn down, but not to the extent of this line as it moved into central Iowa, where wind gusts in the Des Moines and Ankeny area were up to almost 90 miles per hour, and we did see some reports of considerable down corn. So it'll be interesting to see how, with all the problems they've had here the last few days, or last few months, whether or not that's going to further decrease the yield potential in central Iowa. Now, as we take a look at the upper air forecast, we have a relatively decent forecast ahead of us, particularly this weekend, before we start turning our attention to another system moving in. So let's take a look at the upper air models and see how this week will progress. And right now we do have basically this high pressure system aloft. The cool air that came in over the last 24, 36 hours will slowly make its way eastward. We should see decent conditions today. Temperatures basically in the 70s for most locations, and then we will see this trough begin to move in from the western United States. It's a fairly fast moving system, but it's going to move toward the northeast, so we could see precipitation breaking out in the panhandle during the afternoon hours, and particularly over the overnight hours as the surface cold front starts to make its way across the state. And by the time we get into Monday, we'll see that that upper air trough is now centered over eastern South Dakota, and we will see some energy wrapping around this. So there is a chance for thunderstorm activity across central eastern Nebraska, particularly on Monday, and this will probably clear the state as we get into the later afternoon hours of Monday. So by Tuesday, what we will see is the flow flattening out, fairly nice conditions, pretty much seasonal, maybe slightly above normal. Then we'll turn our attention to another trough moving into the Pacific Northwest. So by the time we get to Wednesday, this system itself digs down fairly deeply. It's going to increase our winds from the south, warm our temperature up rather dramatically. We should make it back up into the 80s in a lot of locations. And on Thursday, the system sits here and parks over the central Rockies, so there'll be good precipitation. We should start to see the cold front making it into northwestern Nebraska, and we'll start to see a dramatic cool down. And particularly as we get into Friday, we'll start to see some of that energy translating into western Nebraska and a decent shot of scattered showers and thunderstorms. So in terms of the temperature forecast, we're looking primarily at the 80s across western Nebraska. We'll be looking more in the 70s to maybe low 60s as we move to the end of the week. And as we go into the forecast, above normal temperatures across the east from next Thursday to the following Tuesday. In terms of precipitation, with that trough in the west, we'll see an increase in moisture.
Thanks, Al. Our interviews from today with Frayne Olson, Shane Ellis, Brad Lubben, and Bruce Anderson are available on the Market Journal website as part of the September 20th episode. You can also find them through the Market Journal mobile app. Next week, Roy Smith will be our grain marketing analyst, and we'll take a look at the current state of the U.S. economy. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now.
Animal agriculture is vital to Nebraska. Livestock production not only contributes to our food supply, but also helps our rural communities. Livestock provides revenue for schools, creates jobs, supports Main Street, and enhances the future for farm families. The Nebraska Soybean Board's Animal Agriculture Initiative works to encourage growth of responsible livestock enterprises to benefit agriculture and Nebraska.